All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us by the official beer of the program, Johnny Cuba. Pick up a six-pack of Johnny Cuba, your local Sedanos, Presidente, Winn-Dixie, JohnnyCuba.us. You can use the Johnny locator, find the nearest location to you. Make sure you always drink responsibly, and don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. I will try to stay tranquilo up until puck drop tonight at 8:20. Panthers, Oilers, Game 7. Joining us now, ESPN NHL writer, senior writer, Greg Wyshynski, kind enough to hang out with us again. I mean, how glad are you going to be, Greg, when all of this travel is done? Like, have you ever had such a crazy travel schedule than what you've dealt with the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it is the longest distance between two cities in the Stanley Cup final, and it is the longest into June that we've had a series. So it has been a marathon, well over 2 weeks on the road. And obviously, none of us were aware that it would go 7 games when it was 3-0 for the Panthers. But here we are. And listen, man, it's all worth it for what we get tonight. But it's been a long one for sure.
Okay, so help put into a little bit of context here, Greg. How big is this game tonight? I mean, I heard the final call in Edmonton of Game 6, and they called it, we're going to Florida for Game 7 and the biggest game in the history of the Stanley Cup. Is that true?
Potentially. My bar for great Stanley Cup final series and ones that the Game 7 felt like life or death was the 2011 series between the Bruins and the Canucks, just because of how nasty that series was. And then obviously Vancouver losing at home, the Canadian streak of cup drought continues, and then they burn their city down. That's where the bar is set for me. The difference between this and that is you have that historic comeback by Edmonton that will go down if they complete it in Game 7 as maybe the best postseason comeback in sports history, given the context. And the context being that the last team to do it was the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs, who played 48 games in a season and who played 2 rounds in the playoffs. Like, it's the difference between running a lap and running a marathon when you compare the 2 feats. So you have that. And then on top of that, obviously, you have the McDavid part of it, where you are watching our Gretzky, our Mario Lemieux, our generational talent potentially win his first cup and win it in the single most dramatic way he could win it. Oh, and by the way, he is the driving force behind this insane comeback. So it's a bit of a Canadian-centric view of Game 7 being the biggest game in the history of the playoffs. But I mean, there's ample evidence that could be the case, even if the Panthers win and hold off this upset bid.
Does it matter how we got here? Do the previous 6 games matter before Game 7?
They matter for the Oilers. The fact of the matter is that in every round, the Oilers have gotten better after Game 3, dramatically. Stuart Skinner, I think, has maybe 1 loss or is undefeated after Game 3.
I think he's 10-0.
Yeah, I think he's 10-0, and I think the Oilers have 1 loss after Game 3. So, they've made it a pattern where they don't get off the blocks the fastest, but they win the race. And they've tightened up defensively in every series, and they've gotten progressively better, and Skinner has been the backbone for all of that. So the past is prologue for them. I mean, I don't think there's any way they can't feel good about where they are right now based on that history, not only in this series, but in previous series. I don't think it matters to the Panthers, to be honest with you, that they're on the precipice of being a laughing stock and a punchline in perpetuity as the team that blows this lead. I think all that matters is that they built a lead to then get 4 cracks at winning a cup. And the previous 3 didn't go well. Game 6 was a disaster, I felt, for them, to the point where I think Paul Maurice doesn't even mention it in talking about the potential for them to win this game. He goes right back to Game 5, where they played pretty well. I think they feel like they earned their cracks at this thing, and they don't necessarily feel the weight of the embarrassment that they'll incur if they lose.
So 2 of the 3 wins for Edmonton were on home ice, where they're a great home team all year. And of course, we know you get last change. So how huge is that now tonight for the Panthers?
It was bigger earlier in the series when they were keeping McDavid in check. But I mean, last time he was in South Florida, he put up 4 points. And they had last change, and they were throwing the 5-man unit with Barkov and Forsling and Ekblad against them as often as possible, and it didn't matter. The biggest concern for the Panthers right now should be that the Oilers extended this thing to Game 7 with a Game 6 win that didn't have a single point from McDavid. I don't even think he had a shot in the game.
Nope.
So, like, they were able to do that without Connor. And now you're in a Game 7 in a place where Connor just came off a 4-point effort. And so last change is great. You get the matchups that you want. But at the end of the day, like, you are going up against a force of nature on the other side of the ice, and it may not matter who you throw at him at this point.
What do you expect tonight from an officiating standpoint? How is a Game 7 different when it comes to what the officials let go?
They let a lot go. It's going to be rare, especially I think this is the game where you would expect the potency of the Edmonton power play to be in the backs of the minds of the officials. At the end of the day, the referees don't want to affect the outcome of a game. Like, that's their mantra. That's their RoboCop programming. There's their prime directive. Don't influence the outcome of a game. They know inherently that if you give the Oilers 4 power plays in this game, you're going to directly affect the outcome of the Stanley Cup final because their power play will not go over 4. So that is probably in the backs of their minds. And then on top of that, game 7 are usually pretty tightly officiated, and you don't see a lot of power play opportunities.
The Panthers' defense the last few games, how much of it do you believe has been on Bobrovsky compared to how much should be on the defenseman letting them down in front of him?
I thought he played pretty well in Game 6. He wasn't given a lot of opportunity by his defense on some of those chances. Cross ice one-timers, guy falling down, breakaway. Like, it's not on him if those kinds of high danger opportunities are presented to their opponents. That being said, I didn't think he was that good in Game 5. I thought he gave up a goal to McDavid you can't give up, where you're just kind of standing there and McDavid scores. Anyone who's expecting Bob to put on the Superman cape and win 3-0 like he did in Game 1 and Game 7 is misguided. I think he's tired. I think his sharpness has waned as the series has gone on. I think they're doing everything they can to try to, like, drag this guy over the finish line in hopes that he can, play well enough to give them a chance to win and not poorly enough to cost them the game. But, if for all the talk about McDavid's legacy, I mean, we were a few games away from talking about Bob being a 2-time Vezina winner and a Stanley Cup champion. And so if he does pull a rabbit out of his hat tonight, changes the whole narrative, and all of a sudden he gets to be the hero again.
Is there any scenario where McDavid is not the Conn Smythe? Like Sasha Barkov, game-winning goal, hat trick. Is McDavid still the Conn Smythe?
Yeah, I think so. I can't imagine. The only caveat that people were getting, besides maybe a dogmatic I don't vote for somebody on the losing team outlook, is that the series had not gone far enough for him to earn the Conn Smythe. Like, now that it's gone 7 games, that counter argument goes by the wayside. We're talking about a player that broke a Wayne Gretzky record for most assists in a postseason. We're talking about a guy who's 2 points away from matching Gretzky's record for the most points in a Stanley Cup final. He's rewritten the record book in every round, and he is, in my opinion, the reason that there is a Game 7. I know he didn't really have an impact in Game 6, but back-to-back 4-point games, first guy in NHL history to do that in the final in 4 and 5 are the reason we're here. So I think there's every statistic and sort of like ethereal justification for him to be the MVP, and he's going to win it, win or lose.
Greg, the good news is no matter what happens tonight, you got one more plane ride. It's home, and then you're done. You get a little bit of a break here. No more flying between countries. Appreciate you joining us here. Thanks so much, and I hope it's a fantastic game tonight.
I think it's going to be a fantastic game. I think Paul Murray said it tonight. Like, all the pressure that these guys have felt is going to be expressed in what could be the fastest hockey we've ever seen in the first 10 or 15 minutes of this game. It's going to be great.